Well, happy Sunday and a very good morning to everyone on this February 14th. We have with us Reverend Dennis Reynolds, who gave the service today titled Words of Love. And I think JC wanted to go first.
Michael, would you?
I took good notes. I wrote, somehow I've got 9 Greek forms of love, not 7. So I don't know, I made 2 up, I guess, as you went along. But I'm just wanting to let you know that afterwards on the screen, there was a little thing on YouTube, right? Called Twins Standing Up for Their Civil Rights. And they were like 4-year-olds. So before we erased that, I looked at it. We looked at it. And 2 little girls, one black, one white. Black girl with the right kind of black hair. Little white girl with absolute straight, long blonde hair. I mean, they were so typically of their own race. And they were twins. And their parents, their moms let them dress alike and everything. And they just went through life at that time in their life, right now, as twins. And they were told at a birthday party that they couldn't be twins because their skin was different colors. And drawing herself up to her full 4-year-old soul, she said, "Skin doesn't matter. We're twins because we have one soul."
Oh,
I thought I would let you know, Dennis, if you wanted to find that and hook that on to your talk. But it was the perfect amalgamation of all that you said. And I truly enjoyed this morning.
The unfortunate reality is that they will likely have very different life experiences based on how other people treat them.
Well,
that's
how
the unfortunate reality of our culture,
yeah.
Which brings us full circle to the reason why race and color matters, is because it matters on how people experience life in this culture. I mean, there's stories of siblings who were of, different racial tones. And the darker sibling will come through a grocery line and be asked for ID when their sister right in front of them, who looked very white, was not asked for ID to cash a check. And those kinds of differential experiences are all too frequently documented. So, but yeah, that sweet essence is awesome and important to remember. And why do we have these structural realities that don't acknowledge that reality?
Well, I have my faith pinned on the idea that they may be at a time in our lives when they will get backing also all their lives, and they may prevail if we will let them.
I'll try to put it on the Black Lives Matter list, or maybe even open the chat on Wednesday, if you all want to attend that Wednesday at 6:30.
Yeah, you're talking about the AEO that you're doing?
Yes,
right?
And it's a perfect opener, Dennis, if you get a chance to see it for your your entire sermon today. It was great.
Yeah, cool. Lurley wanted to go next.
I was on the phone with one of my twins, and when I heard you guys talking about twins, I have a set of identical twins that's only 2 minutes apart from each other. However, the one that's 2 minutes older is more of the patriotic type. Anyway, watching them grow up was absolutely fascinating because they did not speak until they were almost 3. And however, they would communicate with each other mentally and telepathy, or whatever you want to call it. And to this day, one lived in San Francisco and the other one lived in Arizona. And one had an appendix attack, had to have his appendix taken out. And the other one called me to say he had this horrible side ache. It's just been very interesting. So I cannot believe they have two different souls. I mean, they have the same soul. They definitely have two different.
Oh yeah, but that's where their caring for each other comes from. So
yeah, okay, that's all. I had to throw in my identical twins.
Any excuse to talk about your children.
That's right.
There is some fascinating research around twins. I have, well, only one is surviving now, twin aunts who, the one who died was 93 and her surviving sister is now 95. And they were part of a twin study that I don't know what institution, but they were flown to New York every year for many years to be involved in this ongoing many-year twin study. And they had a variety of stories like you describe of sensing something going on with the other at a distance. That, you know, there's no clear, easily definable logical description for lots of things that happen in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of ties into to what JC was saying, is that, you know, for sure, like, I imagine identical twins there's some bonds there that we just don't understand. But you also hear of stories of like animals that cross insane distances to find their pets where they don't know what their pets, you know, where they don't know where their pets are living. And there's just such like bizarre things about the bonds that we share as living beings that we just don't understand. Lillian wanted to go next.
Hi, Dennis. I want to go back about 50 years and talk to you for a moment about what I learned and experienced in the 70s around romantic love. For all of you, if you can just imagine what life would have been like for lesbians, having lived in the closet forever and ever, and finding as partners maybe someone they met through another friend because they would never go out openly or acknowledge at work that they were lesbians or go to bars because there really weren't any. So life was very, and relationships happened among friendship groups, and it was always traumatic if a couple in the friendship group broke up, because then they might pair off with someone else and it could destroy the entire friendship group because that's who everyone knew. But come the 70s and what we started with gay and lesbian liberation meant that women and men, but especially women, since we do the romance part, started coming out. And it was like young teenagers going to their very first event, where they could barely dance because they hadn't had much experience dancing with a partner, and everything that entails. And so what I witnessed and what I experienced as a therapist and as a member of that community was romantic love turning into addiction, which it was, because of the projection resulting in frustration like you wouldn't believe. And we therapists kind of had this shared problem resolution solving ongoing dialogues among us, starting with, what do you do when the U-Haul arrives on the third date? Okay, so they've met and they're going to move in together and have a third date. And then we know that in a year, the differences will start to become problems. And then the problems will start to become arguments. And about 15, 17 months, they're talking about this isn't going to work out. And 2 years they'd separated. So then came the term serial relationships. And it just went on and on. We watched it all through the 70s and into the 80s. And then the next thing that happened was similar in the heterosexual community. It's like all of a sudden single bars opened up and it became much more acceptable for women to go into bars, either with another friend or even alone, and meet somebody, and the thing played itself out all over again. So my comment, Dennis, is as I was listening to you, I had all of this flashing, through my memory and my mind. And, I'm going to be 80 soon, and I'm not out and about in the world. But I wonder, from your perspective over the last 10 years or so, has that changed? Has it calmed? Is what we see the moment the bars open up, kind of a resurgence of that frantic need to, make a connection and find a partner, and even above and beyond the risks of COVID, people continue to do that. So your thoughts on that?
Okay. Well, the first thing is, one, thank you for the perspective, in the sense that I knew the perspective, and I put a little disclaimer paragraph, you may note in there, that his perspective was heterocentric and dualistic and binary, and so somewhat dated and incomplete. I don't think it makes it any less profound. The central notions of projection when it was limited. I mean, his other books are He, She, and We are the three pieces he wrote. I'm not remembering all of She, but he did a pretty good job saying, this is a man's perspective on women's realities, and therefore limited, my reflections on what Johnson had to say were my own limited reflections on my experience. But to kind of address the question that, as I hear coming from you, is where are we at now? Is we're in a brave new world where many folks are challenging a whole array of traditional definitions around identity, sexual practices, orientation. A trans community who's out in ways that they never were before, because many of them couldn't acknowledge it was even a possibility. I have a friend who lived for decades as an identified lesbian who transitioned in his 60s to male.
Oh, wow.
And he got the notion in an adult OWL class at the UU Church, and began to explore non-binary identity, or an identity different than biological birth sex, and has transitioned fully. And when I spend time with this friend of mine now, it's like, well, of course, he is his full self in this identity. And so we're in such a different place. I was honored 2 summers ago to be invited to perform a wedding between a non-binary couple, both of whom identify as non-binary. Hope to parent someday. And because their biological birth sexes are different, they have the ability to biologically parent. And their relationship is different than anything I could have imagined growing up in the cultural framework I grew up in. I mean, I was kind of a wimpy guy, and I struggled with all of that. because I didn't meet the definitions of how I thought I was supposed to be male in this culture. I mean, you guys didn't even know the part of my history. I hung around with children for decades. You know,
Yeah.
that's considered manly in most constructs, you know. So I think we're in a certainly more open period. And I don't know how it's going to play out. But some of those core psychological pieces that Johnson lifts up and that I thought were worth repeating was the sense of, if we enter into relationship out of need to be with that one who will make me whole, rather than I am whole and I want to be with someone else who's also whole, we're in a difficult place. That the healthiest place we can be is, you know, really, and I struggle with the words, trying to remember which is the word for self-love. You know, it's all Greek to me, right?
Yes.
No.
I had to say
No.
that, right?
Oh.
But the sense of self-love, that's the foundation for healthy
Dennis,
relationships.
excuse me, my question was less focused on minority groups and all of that, but it was, my interest and question was far more focused on how romantic love as an addiction, frustration emerge. We've always had romantic love, but in Western civilizations, you know, what happened in the 70s and then into the 80s with non-gay and lesbian people, you know, opened up the door to new ways for singles to meet each other, and therefore a lot more coming together. So my question to you is kind of more, since that is so uniquely Western civilization, do you think we will move out of that and move more deeply into other kinds of loves? Or do you think something like, you know, just our year of quarantine is going to create even another acceleration, you know, of romantic love and of that chain that does lead to an addiction kind of love and then a frustration because you've come together so quickly, you don't really know the person you've connected with.
Right.
So real quick, Dennis, I want you to respond to that. I transcribed Lillian's question as best I could, but I know that there's going to be a listener who doesn't know what an OWL class is. And I was hoping you could describe that real quick before you answer Lillian's question.
The first piece is OWL is Our Whole Lives, and it's a sexuality curriculum that was created by the Unitarian Universalist Association and the United Church of Christ. And it includes kindergarten curricula, it includes elementary school curricula, middle school curricula, high school curricula, and adult curricula. The adult curricula now has two parts. That's a young adult curricula and a more mature adult curricula. I co-facilitated high school groups, and I also co-facilitated an adult group before it split. And it's really some mind-stretching kind of curricula for lots of people and all, you know, our whole lives, recognizing that we are sexual beings through our whole lives, and that there's an array of possibilities of how we may choose to embrace that. And which ties me to, you know, a partial question to your question, Lillian, was that sense is what's happening now is hard for this old cisgendered straight white guy to really understand. One aspect that I see that kind of confuses it, there's a hookup culture about sexual relationships that is kind of mind-blowing for me. And maybe it means that some young people are better able to separate that erotic lust aspect of that from a relationship they might actually want to be in for their life, and understanding that lust and love are not the same thing, but accepting lust without judgment and without a whole bunch of repression and critique that I believe Western Judeo-Christian culture has laid on top of, sexual love, and permeates out into anything we call love.
That's exactly the thought I didn't know what I wanted, but thank you, because it seems that women are changing, and maybe we are better able at younger ages. I can't speak for that, but maybe better able at younger ages to enter into that romantic phase without making it be something more than it actually is.
And it is to maybe, compartmentalize a little better, and then those pieces, in terms of, I have a young friend who is now engaged to a person they met this year during COVID, and first communicated in these kinds of ways. And then after a number of online communications, met in a park with masks at a distance, and then started going for walks together, and then got to know each other really well before they decided there's something here we're willing to take some risks to explore more further, more deeply. And they went a period of self-imposed quarantine, each of them did, and then they got together. And wow. They knew each other very well in so many levels before they ever even held hands, right? Let alone any more intimate physical contact. And by the time they had physical contact, they were already in love with each other. It was kind of old school,
Oh,
yeah. And now they're engaged. And it's pretty sweet, I think. They came and visited with us, and we had a long table in our front yard, and they camped in our yard when we had meals with them. But, so there are such an array of possibilities, and I think our media influence, overemphasis of some kind of magic that's romantic love as being true love, without recognizing beloved community is on the list of very true love. And I don't need to tell that to you folks. You help me understand that more deeply, because you have your history as a beloved community that I visit from time to time. Yeah. And that's what I hope lifting up that Johnson would be, is just saying, let's debunk that this is true love. Now, there's not that I'm saying there's not magic in Valentine's Day. I mean, I am blessed to live with my, beloved partner. I had some relationships that weren't as good as this one, and 25 years later, it's better than it was when it began, but we are also strengthened by the fact that we have other kinds of loves that are the whole list of the seven, and some that are, amalgamations of them, that are bits and pieces. So that's why, I wanted to bring this kind of a message to Valentine's Day, because Valentine's Day is so much. I mean, I know people who hate Valentine's Day because I'm not in a relationship, and I don't even want to think about all that oogie stuff going on out there, which reminds me of in the 3rd grade, if you didn't get a Valentine's card from everybody, you would feel like so-and-so doesn't like me, and so, it's just one part of a whole array of possibilities that exist in our whole lives.
Oh, good wraparound there.
Yeah.
And may I take this opportunity to say that these kinds of conversations are exactly the kinds of conversations that we had last Thursday in our Expression in Civil Society AEO, where you got to see Julianne and myself viciously lock horns over the idea of modern feminism And may I say that Julianne is like a Flintstone for sharpening oneself. It's been absolutely fantastic. So if you can,
a whetstone.
Yeah, please join that. Okay.
Are you saying that I'm a Neanderthal?
Oh
no, no. He meant a whetstone, like the sharpening type stone.
No, I'm saying you're a tough cookie. You're yeah.
Okay.
You're sharp. Yeah, it's without actually, you know, if anybody's curious, without Julianne there, the conversations would be rather dry. So yeah. Who wants to go next? Yeah.
Well,
okay, how about Martha? And then I see Laura Lee had her hand up. Am I missing anyone? No? Oh, okay. JC. Okay, cool. Go ahead, Martha.
Well, there was a clip from a movie of what was it? Tobey Maguire. No, what was it? Anyway, it was the one where we're saying, "You complete me," and she says, "You had me at hello."
Right.
And I think that too many people still are hooked into that. And when Dennis did approach that, I was very hopeful he would. That people always look to someone else. And I know that one thing that an old lady like me, who had been in a dreadful marriage, waited a long time before I attempted to even have another relationship, and to find someone in my 50s that said, okay, you know, you do your thing, I do my thing, we have each other, we enjoy each other, but we don't own each other, you know, kind of thing. And a lot of people sometimes still don't understand that, where each person is an individual. In fact, our wedding vows were about two people who like to dance separately, but choose to dance together. And all the writings and the readings were from that concept. So that was just my 2 cents about, you know, to me, that's a more healthy way of looking at it. There are sometimes I think, oh my goodness, I still sometimes wish sometimes that I, quote unquote, was the end all be all, but then, you know, I call myself up short because that's sort of an old fashioned romantic kind of thing. You have to, you know, so you can't be everything to everybody.
Yeah.
And you just have to be to yourself, to thine own self be true. I think that's the basic for that.
Right. If the service had included a time for all ages, a book I recommend to folks is Pezzettino by Leo Leone.
Oh, I love Leo Leone. Oh, yeah.
And it's about this little being that looks around and sees all these other beings made up of many parts and says, well, I need to be a part of something. I need to be a part of somebody, and wanders around and ends up breaking into little bits and realizing that they too are made up of a whole bunch of little parts and aspects of self. And they are complete in and of themselves. And they don't need to be a part of anybody else to be part of something that's whole, you know. And so there's that piece. And then it'll come to me in a minute, the source, but there's a reading often used in weddings that the oaks grow not too close together. It'll come to me in a minute because I've read it at a wedding. Yeah. But it's a sense of, you know, in order to grow our maximum potential, we need some space. And an oak tree is certainly a pretty good metaphor.
Yeah. So in keeping with our everybody speaks once before anybody speaks twice policy, Julianne wanted to go next. So
I'd like to comment that it's hard to escape the notion of the primacy of romantic love being the be all and end all of your existence. From a young age, we're hit with movies. What's your sign? Are you compatible? Who's your soulmate? It's an industry. Mm-hmm. And the fairy tale weddings. I had a relative that spent $100,000 on her wedding and was divorced in 10 months. So, and this goes on and on and on. You can find it anywhere, and they're not exposed to anything more mature, or any education that would possibly lead one to think that there was a more mature version of love rather than the being consumed by the perfection of the other. Especially when your parents and grandparents have fallen for the same ruse. And it's not really a ruse. I mean, you want to think there's some romance in the world, but I think it's an industry that's lucrative for many.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the pieces that I think is what I found significant in those looking at the different Greek forms is a broader definition of eros. We think the only way we can get passion have passion in our life is through a relationship, with typically one other, rather than recognizing there's broader definitions of passion. If we look at all creative energy, it's not just about procreation. And part of the Western myth is sort of framed in a Judeo-Christian morality, in a sense of, unfortunately, that we got a lot from the Apostle Paul and his writings and his framing of sexual love should only exist for procreation, and a whole lot of judgment that came with that. He's got some wonderful lines about love, but it's intentionally limited and framed sometimes. And, in that procreation myth too. And the procreation myth comes to mind for me, and this is just me thinking out loud, is do we need another to create our own sense of wholeness is part of that myth, rather than we can each be an oak tree that stands near each other but not too close. And neither one is dependent on the other.
Great. Lurley wanted to go next.
We were talking about lesbians and all that good stuff, and I just wanted to throw out if you wanted to talk about Masato.
Oh, well, since you brought it up, we had a friend from Japan who identified, she was transgendered, male to female transgender, who was who was attracted to women, so self-identified as a lesbian, and that was late 80s, and it was an interesting experience getting to know her.
It was. I just remember. I just thought of that.
Yeah. JC.
At the time I signed on, I had this simple thought, and then I have had a much deeper thought since then. So the simple thought is, Dennis, I see that you have put your pronouns with your name on this Zoom situation. I was at a teaching by my daughter last night, and she has her pronouns on there. And I'm saying, well, of course, because when you do that, what I see is you're accepting the fact that transgender is part of now, and you are participating in that by putting your pronouns. And I decided I shall do that too.
It's a piece that comes from some communities that I've engaged with in recent years, where when you introduce yourself at some of the meetings I go to, you're asked to identify yourself by name, groups you may be affiliated with, and pronouns. And in one group I work with in Seattle, we were also encouraged to identify ourselves of what indigenous communities' land we grew up on or lived on. And that's a self-awareness kinds of things of understanding. I've spent most of my lifetime on Kalapuya land. You know, it's that broadenings of awareness that I find helpful.
I was on a committee and a new member whose pronouns were they, them. And I will tell you, I was incredibly challenged to speak to with what looked like to me, him, and get it right. And it took me a long time to be able to see that that was why his hair was long on one side of his head and short on the other. And that helped me remember it's a they, them thing. He sees himself multiply. So this whole thing is really big in our culture right now. And I understand your use of the pronouns to me means, okay, he's saying I'm a part of this, I get it. It's important for somebody else to know this about me. And then the other thing is on one of my Valentines today was something written by Laline, and it designated as an interesting aspect of our relationship, our changes, how she changes and how I change. And I've thought about that line among the others that she wrote as being absolutely crucial, because how you change relative to your whole message today affects the relationship and fosters more change, fosters the need to let go of something that you once were and no longer are. Yes, the changes, and that keeps it from becoming that frustrating thing of each person expects themselves to be perfect for the other person to become whole to. So I think it makes it work better when you accept changes, because I've been in the other kind of relationship, which I did beautifully, only I didn't know who I was, except for that.
What I love with the he, him stuff is all of the difficulty that men had in making the transition from calling all women girls, no matter what your age, you know, and we survived that. So we'll get well past they, them, he, him, her.
Well, the wedding that I described of a non-binary couple, and I knew one of the couples who, when they were identifying male, was in the youth group at the UU Church. And we had a close relationship, and I was honored when they asked me, they and their now spouse asked me to officiate at their wedding. But after the wedding, something was said. Their mom came up to me and said, you know, sometimes I remember they, them. You know, I called him he for 30 years, so he's got to give me some time. They need to give me some time to come around to change some habits. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, if that's true for the parent, you know, of someone who transitions, it's also true for the rest of us. And what I appreciate is when we are given the opportunity to apologize and correct when we make mistakes. And we don't get all flustered by our own sense of perfection. You know, that we're willing to be committed to trying to grow and be more open to people being dealt with and acknowledged in the manner they tell us they want to be.
Yes.
Yeah. John had a question. John, would you like to ask your question, or do you want me to read?
I'm not trying to distract from the conversation. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
One of the questions I've put forward to English professors and some drama experts is, what might you identify as among the most romantic dialogues in either American or British literature, if there are any? I have stumped a number of people with that question. I am curious.
Dialogues.
The reason I would ask is to, in my imagination, prepare for a screen test.
I got it.
Well, I mean, the ultimate ones that are out there in our culture, and, you know, are going to be, you know, Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet kinds of pieces. But that's, you know, certainly fits the myth of the forbidden love, you know, and the love that's not obtainable. And in order to pursue it, cost them their lives. So I don't know, other than looking at that history, if we use that definition of romance, that, you know, Johnson and others would contend comes down through those cultural stories of, you know, the knight and the fair princess as the extreme versions of it. And always forbidden love that you're never going to quite get to it is some of the most considered, some of the most romantic as all is the love you're never going to be able to obtain and or sustain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's why I challenge that myth along with Johnson and increasing numbers of people in our culture of deconstructing that. The other piece, when you mentioned the reference to dictionaries, it reminded me Merriam-Webster's word of the year in 2019 was the non-binary pronouns they, them.
Mm-hmm.
To use those as singular was the word of the year in 2019. So it's in the dictionary as a singular pronoun now.
Yeah,
John, I would ask back to you, what's your sense of it?
Pardon?
He was asking John.
Back in terms of the questioner. I mean, partially I get to say, well, maybe this, but I get to say, I don't know, you tell me.
Well, there's obviously thousands and thousands of monologues that are written about love, but I was curious about a dialogue.
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind for American literature was, I don't think it was Ira Gershwin. I think it was DuBose Hayward, who wrote the lyrics for Porgy and Bess's There's a Duet. That's Bess, You Is My Woman Now, which is, it is so beautiful and like soul defining. And so you could look up the lyrics to that piece.
Can I just say something on that? What you just said, Michael, triggered the soul, touching into the soul. Instead of, I look at something like that, if you are wanting to express your caring and whatnot, it comes from in here. It doesn't come out of a book. Like, Bess, you are my woman now.
You is my woman.
I mean, I can hear that voice, and that whole piece is just so, I mean, it gets you right here, but that's how it felt by the person who was saying it.
Yeah, and it's hard to extract the lyrics from, you know, from the melody, from the music, from the storyline, you know, all of those things. Yeah.
So if one wants to express feelings, one probably needs to go in and, well, what are your feelings and what do you want to say? Or, I mean, maybe I'm getting a wrong impression here. But if, you know, we come from scripted language, and too many people wanted to follow scripts, and scripts have to be right. And we get a bunch of talking heads going like this.
Yeah, that's true.
So
yeah.
I'm thinking the best words, I think of the words that Joe and I used in our wedding. I mean, it came from inside what we were feeling. It wasn't anybody, you know, we took an idea from something, but we came from inside of what we wanted to say. So that's my, you know.
Right, and words are only a partial expression.
Exactly.
Especially of feelings. And the one you lift up, you know, Michael, like you said, you can't separate the music and the lyric, because part of that emotion is in the lyric. And part of that is emotion is how it's portrayed in the voice that is singing that, you know, that music and that lyric wedded together. And there's some things that aren't spoken. You know, Lillian, when you were making comments before about the history of, you know, lesbian communities being able to be out, prior to that, Tennessee Williams wrote an incredible one-act play called Something Unspoken about an older couple who had spent a lifetime together and were deeply, deeply in love. And in our times would have come out far, far earlier in their lives if they felt that possibility was available to them. And the title and the expression in the play was Something Unspoken, which was a deep, profound love that existed between the two women in this couple. You know, and Williams, as a gay man, you know, gave that a voice in the form of these. I mean, I knew the play because my first wife was in it, in a production of it at the University of Oregon. And it was a profoundly moving piece to me to help understand more about the diversity of love.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that was also a strong element in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Oh,
You know,
God,
yeah. That what's the name? What's the main character's name? I can't. But he's gay, right?
Yeah.
And you have to find that out through the course of the play.
Right.
Yeah. Connie.
Well, the line that Dennis said towards in this talk, where he said, "We are strengthened when we have other types of love."
Yep.
And I got to thinking about, I wish someone would have said something to me when I was a teenager, you know, falling in love with this boyfriend and that boyfriend. It really made me think a lot about helping people who feel rejected by one person to identify in their life that they have other types of love that are coming to them and that they need maybe to focus on when they're in that state of feeling rejection, you know, to really surround them with the idea that there's lots of other love coming at you. You know, you've just chosen one that's closed a door to you. And I really like that line. I'm going to use that a lot in talking to my granddaughters. So thank you.
Amen. Yeah.
Plus, I have one I want to say to Michael. I loved your music at the end of the sermon.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah, that was fun. I had to enlist the help of a guitarist because I can't play guitar to save my life.
It was really.
Oh, thanks.
I love music in the sermons. I think music is really important. Very important.
Live music. I think I shared with Martha, and I may have shared with the group when we were there at the recording sessions, that the message from my mentor minister, Carolyn Colbert, who said, the sermon, you mean that 20 minutes that some people think is the most important part?
Yes.
Yes.
You know, and you've heard me try to, you know, figure out in lieu of a reading using a piece of music. And even this time we used something that was written as a lyric, you know, to recognize that it's one of the more limited ways to convey real emotion is just simply words. But if we can do words and music, and when we actually get to be in the same room together and have a few hugs and high fives and, you know, even fist bumps or elbow bumps would be better than nothing, you know.
Yeah. One of the things I loved about Reverend Annie was she was very unconcerned that the music had anything to do with the service, because her idea was that if somebody got nothing from the sermon, they might get something from the music if the music has nothing to do with, you know, and that was her logic. And that was very charming to me. It was very humble of her in that way. Literally wanted to say something.
Oh dear, I don't.
You didn't. Okay, I thought I saw your hand go up. Okay.
I think I was stretching.
Okay. I guess we go back to JC.
I'm looking at my list of the 9 kinds of Greek love. That's 2 more than you actually had. And I realized that somewhere early in my life, I learned about agape. And I learned in the context of try to remember they're different and identify it. When you're feeling love, decide, is this agape or is this romantic love? Allowing myself at that point only 2 kinds. But then you talked about storge, which is parental love, which means putting up with things. Yeah. Now, we need to understand that as a culture. Parents are expected to put up with things and not have to slap people about it. You learn to just put up with it and wait. They'll grow out of it if you keep nudging them away from the wrong way to go there. So I'm saying, oh, I'm so glad that that's part of that. Then that philia, between equals, that was why there were in my growing up time, sometimes some boys that there never seemed to be a reason to kiss them, but you really liked hiking with them or doing something with them. So I just think we need to get these Greek things back and alive as options in our culture, because they're really there, but we don't know how to appreciate it and accept it for what it is. So I'm really thrilled to have all these other ways to look at it and realize that I am aware that they're different, but I didn't know that it was allowed.
Well, or that we can call it love.
Yes. Yes.
So, you know, that we have these platonic friendships, but acknowledging that we love those people.
Right.
Without having another connotation that's much narrower.
And as for that other thing, as I said before, the idea that anyone in a loving relationship can grow up or can change and still be meaningfully in the relationship, that's a biggie. And really, it might be good for our culture to be able to hold on to that one. Since if you're not growing up, you're not paying attention.
The storge in particular, for me, I also included sibling love. Sometimes it's really hard for me to love my siblings, but we have reached a point in our life where when we're on the phone, we end every phone call with, I love you. One of my siblings had a very difficult time in their life, and they ended up hospitalized, and my sister and I showed up to provide care in the hospital. And she's the one who, you know, turned to them and said, you know, you may have forgotten, but we love you. And that's kind of storge. We love them no matter what, even when it's challenging to like what they're doing, or even like them right now, because we've made a commitment.
My brothers and I are actually saying I love you in this phase of our lives. So, yeah. Martha.
Oh, and one thing I think is difficult for some people because of cultural ways. I grew up in a very English family, and I remember my mother criticizing other members of our church because they hugged and kissed each other in public. And it took me a long time to realize that there was, when you cared for someone, because as everyone knows, I'm a hugger now, but I wasn't as a kid because it just wasn't done. And my father, to his dying day, never said he loved me. even as they were wheeling him into surgery, and I was walking along the side of him and I'm saying, "I love you, Daddy." And I never got anything. He didn't know what to do with that word. And that's a cultural thing. And I can see how some starstruck kids who have never had anybody normally saying, "I love you." I mean, I hear my grandkids saying that to their, mom. It's the way we do things now. But my family did not, and it took me a long time when I married into a Polish family, which was extremely loving. At least my mother-in-law was. And when she'd tell me she'd love me, I always thought, my goodness, that makes me feel funny. I just didn't know what to do with it. So yeah, so we have to remember those cultural things. And I'm hoping that our culture continues to grow with that. And sometimes people have gone completely the other way. Just the romantic love is the only way you can say those things.
Right. And I think that's one of many ways as Unitarian Universalists, we are profoundly countercultural. And in terms of even definitions of who was allowed to have romantic love with whom, were countercultural long before it became more acceptable in the larger culture. And I think part of that goes back to our Universalist history of challenging, of lifting up a divinity that is more loving and less judgmental. Because that's what American Universalism rose in response to, was the Second Great Awakening, where people were on the road preaching a lot of hellfire and damnation. And American Universalism said, wait a minute, we don't believe in that kind of God. We believe in a loving God. And a universally loving God is the core of that word. And that's still, in fact, I think emerging with greater strength right now in our Unitarian Universalist movement than it has been in a long time, because we were rational thinking Unitarians. And now we're recognizing we're both and. And I will push back against any of those people who shorten it. I think I may have used the phrase, for me, Unitarian is an adjective. I'm a universalist.
Yeah. I completely lost track of time. We are just about done, but Glennis gets the closing thought or question for the day.
Well, I just wanted to acknowledge that I've been extraordinarily lucky and fortunate in this life that I play music with people. And some of those people, I share a deep and abiding love with them. And it's never been romantic. They are all married anyway. But the sharing that when you play music with somebody, it opens up a whole communication line that I think opens the way toward that kind of, I don't know if that would be agape or what, but of love. And we tell each other, I love you. I love you. And it's, again, it's something that I learned, that you can have that kind of love without any kind of romance.
Yeah. And I think
feel about you guys.
But yeah, absolutely. That's a very good closing.
Yeah.
I love you, folks, and I love talking with you.
Yeah.
I love you, Dennis.
Yeah, absolutely. And
beloved community, here we are.
Right back at you. Well, fantastic, everybody. Dennis, thank you so much for your time. That was a great conversation.
My great pleasure.
Yeah, and hopefully we will see everybody again next week for the 21st, where I believe we'll have Michelle Avanti. So that's something to look forward to. Have a beautiful Sunday. I love you all.
Love you.
Love you.
Bye.